You asked God for a sign. Then you asked for another one. The problem may not be that God has been silent, but that certainty has become the condition you place on obedience. And until you see why, every new sign may leave you more confused than the last. You may know this pattern well. A decision appears in front of you. A job offer, a relationship, a move, a difficult conversation, a door that could open but not without risk. So you pray. Then you wait for something unmistakable. A phrase in a sermon seems connected. A song comes on at the perfect moment. Someone mentions the same city you have been thinking about. You feel a sudden sense of peace, then lose it the next morning. Instead of becoming clearer, you begin collecting clues. Here is the first distinction that can change the entire process. Healthy discernment asks, what is wise, faithful, and consistent with Scripture? Compulsive sign-seeking asks, how can God remove every possibility that this decision could hurt? Those questions are not the same. The first seeks wisdom. The second seeks immunity from regret. Asking God for guidance is not wrong. Scripture repeatedly encourages prayer, wisdom, counsel, and trust. But repeated sign-seeking can quietly become a way of delaying responsibility. You may call it patience, you may call it caution, you may even call it faith. But fear can wear religious clothing. That is the hidden reason you may keep asking for another sign. You are not always waiting for direction. Sometimes you are waiting for a guarantee. And God has not promised that every faithful decision will feel risk-free. In Matthew 12, some religious leaders asked Jesus for a sign. The request might sound reasonable until you notice the context. They were not encountering Jesus for the first time. They had already seen his teaching and works. In the same chapter, Jesus had healed a man, and the response around him had already forced people to ask who he truly was. The leaders did not lack evidence. They resisted the meaning of the evidence they already had. Jesus answered firmly. He pointed them to the sign of Jonah, a reference that looked ahead to his death and resurrection. The issue was not that honest questions were forbidden. The issue was a heart that kept demanding more while refusing to respond to what had already been revealed. That difference matters. A sincere question says, "Help me understand." A resistant question says, "Give me more so I do not have to decide yet." Which question are you really asking? Imagine you are considering a new job. The work is honest. The opportunity fits your abilities. Trusted people see both the benefits and the risks. Nothing in Scripture condemns it. Yet you still feel uncertain. You ask for a sign. The next day, you see the company's name on a truck and feel excited. That evening, a friend describes a bad experience in the same industry, and now you feel warned. The following morning, a devotional mentions courage. Later, you spill coffee on the application and wonder whether the accident means stop. Soon, you are no longer discerning. You are interpreting everything. This is where the pattern becomes dangerous, because ordinary events can be made to support almost any conclusion. When you are afraid, your mind becomes highly skilled at noticing whatever matches the fear of the moment. The result is not clarity. It is spiritual exhaustion. Proverbs 3:5-6 calls you to trust the Lord rather than leaning entirely on your own understanding, and to acknowledge Him in the paths you take. That does not mean refusing to think. Proverbs is a book devoted to wisdom, observation, correction, and good judgment. Trust does not replace wise thought. It keeps your limited perspective from becoming your God. You still examine the decision. You still seek counsel. You still consider your responsibilities, but you stop demanding complete control over the outcome. That is often the line between discernment and sign-seeking. Discernment gathers enough truth to take a faithful next step. Sign-seeking keeps moving the line for what counts as enough. James 1 says that when you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously. But James also warns against a divided posture. This passage is sometimes used carelessly, as though any uncertainty makes you a bad believer. That is not the point. The deeper warning concerns a heart pulled in opposing directions, wanting God's wisdom while refusing to trust or follow it. You can ask for wisdom and still feel nervous. You can obey and still have questions. You can make a faithful decision without feeling absolute certainty. Faith is not the absence of emotional discomfort. It is the decision not to make emotional comfort your final authority. But there is another layer. Sometimes you keep asking for signs because you do not want to own the decision. If the outcome goes badly, you want to be able to say, "God told me to do it." That sentence can feel safer than saying, "You prayed, sought wisdom, made the best decision you could, and accepted that you are still human." The desire to avoid responsibility can turn guidance into a search for someone to blame. That may sound harsh, but it can also be freeing. You do not need to claim perfect certainty in order to move faithfully. You do not need to attach God's name to every preference. You do not need to turn every impression into a command. You can say, "This seems wise." You can say, "This choice appears consistent with Scripture." You can say, "Trusted counsel supports it." You can say, "The risks are real, but they are not signs of disobedience." That kind of humility is not weak faith. It is honest faith. Consider Thomas in John 20. He wanted tangible proof that Jesus had risen. Jesus met him in his doubt and invited him to examine the evidence. Thomas was not discarded for asking. Yet Jesus also directed him beyond a life that depends on repeated physical confirmation. The lesson is not that every question is sinful. The lesson is that evidence is meant to lead somewhere. A sign cannot become a substitute for trust. At some point, Thomas had to respond to the person standing before him. In the same way, you may already have enough truth to take the next step, even if you do not have enough information to predict the entire road. Think of a crossroads at night. You want floodlights stretching 10 miles in every direction. But often, wisdom is more like a lamp. It gives enough light for the next part of the path, not a complete view of every turn. That is why the most useful question is not, "Can you give me one more sign?" It is, "What has God already made clear? Has Scripture already ruled something out? Does the choice require dishonesty, manipulation, revenge, sexual compromise, neglect of responsibility, or harm to someone entrusted to your care? If so, you do not need a sign to override clear biblical wisdom." On the other hand, are you choosing between two morally legitimate options? If both choices are lawful and responsible, the decision may not involve discovering one hidden answer. It may involve using the wisdom, freedom, character, and counsel God has already given you. This distinction removes false pressure. Not every decision is a secret code. Not every closed door is a divine rejection. Not every delay is a divine message. Not every feeling of peace is proof. Not every feeling of fear is a warning. Emotions matter, but they need interpretation. Circumstances matter, but they are not infallible. Counsel matters, but even trusted people can be wrong. Scripture remains the clearest boundary, and wisdom helps you act inside that boundary. So how do you move forward without becoming careless? Start with 4 honest questions. First, is the decision consistent with clear biblical teaching? Second, what motives are shaping your desire? Third, what do wise and trustworthy people see that fear may be hiding from you? Fourth, what choice would you make if you were not allowed to use a coincidence as proof? That final question reveals a great deal. Return to the job decision. Remove the truck, the spilled coffee, the song, and the passing comment. What remains? The work itself. Your responsibilities, your character, the counsel you have received, the risks you can name, the values the decision will strengthen or weaken. Now you are discerning again. You may still decide yes, you may decide no. The goal is not to force a particular answer. The goal is to stop treating uncertainty as evidence that God has abandoned you. Jesus taught in Matthew 6 that tomorrow carries its own concerns. His instruction was not permission to ignore planning. It was a warning against carrying future trouble before it arrives. Sign-seeking often tries to carry tomorrow in advance. You want proof that the choice will never disappoint you, never cost you, and never expose your limits. But no sign can give that kind of security. Only trust can teach you how to walk without it. This does not mean rushing. Some decisions need time. Some require more information. Some require safety planning, professional advice, pastoral counsel, or legal and financial guidance. Waiting can be wise when there is a clear reason to wait, but endless delay is not automatically spiritual. Ask what new information you are actually waiting for. If you cannot name it, you may not be waiting for wisdom. You may be waiting for fear to disappear. Fear may not disappear before you act. Courage often begins while your hands are still shaking. You can pray for wisdom. You can search Scripture. You can invite correction. You can examine your motives. You can make a responsible choice. Then you can release the outcome without pretending that God gave you a guarantee He never promised. That is a more mature kind of peace. It is not the peace of knowing every consequence. It is the peace of knowing you do not have to control every consequence. The open loop at the beginning now has an answer. The hidden reason you keep asking for another sign may be that certainty feels safer than trust. And borrowed certainty feels safer than personal responsibility. But faith does not ask you to become reckless. It asks you to become faithful with the light you already have. So before you ask for one more sign, pause. Name what Scripture has already made clear. Name the fear beneath your hesitation. Name the wise next step that does not require a miracle to recognize. Then take that step with humility. You asked God for a sign, but what you may need now is the courage to respond to the truth He has already given you.